I used to believe grief had a sound. Something loud. Something unmistakable. Crying. Wailing. The kind of pain people notice and respect. But when my father died, grief arrived quietly. It sat beside me, heavy and unmoving, like a shadow I couldn't shake. Not because I missed him, but because his absence changed everything. My father had been a powerful man. Not just wealthy, but controlling in ways that shaped every decision I ever made. Where I studied, who I married, how I lived. Even my mistakes had been carefully managed under his watchful eye. And suddenly he was gone. At the funeral, people hugged me, whispered apologies, told me how strong I was. I nodded, smiled, played the role of the grieving daughter perfectly. What no one knew was that beneath the black dress and practiced tears, I felt something dangerously close to relief. For the first time in my life, no one was watching. 3 weeks later, I threw the party. Some people later said it was too soon. Disrespectful. Cruel. But those people had never lived inside my life. The house was full that night, not with family, not with love, but with noise. Music thumped through the walls my father once ruled. Champagne bottles popped like fireworks. Laughter echoed where silence had always been demanded. I wore a dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Tight, confident, unapologetic. I wanted the world to see me exactly as I was now. Untethered. Nate moved through the house quietly, almost invisibly, refilling glasses, straightening things that didn't need fixing. Watching people who barely acknowledged him drink expensive liquor he didn't choose. We had been married 8 years. 8 years, and I could no longer remember why. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't unfaithful. He was small. Emotionally. Socially. Ambitionally. My father had chosen him because he was safe. Because he would never challenge me. Never challenge the family. At some point, safety had started to feel like suffocation. That night, I didn't want safe. I wanted reckless. Tyler was leaning against the wall near the pool doors, young and careless and stupid in a way that felt refreshing. No expectations. No questions. Just attention. I sat beside him, close enough that the room noticed. Nate noticed too. I saw it in the way his shoulders tightened, the way he hesitated before approaching me. As if he still believed he had authority here. He didn't. When he placed the champagne bottle on the table in front of me, I didn't thank him. I didn't look at him. I was too busy enjoying the feeling of being watched. When Tyler's hand slid onto my thigh, I let it stay there. It felt like reclaiming something. Nate said my name quietly. Not angrily. Not loudly. Just wounded. That sound used to matter. It didn't anymore. The words that followed came out sharper than I expected, fueled by alcohol and years of buried resentment. I told him I didn't need him, that my father had left me everything, that he no longer had a place in my life. When I told him to leave, when I told him I didn't care whether he lived or died, the room froze. For a heartbeat, I wondered if I'd gone too far. Then laughter exploded. Phones came out. Someone turned the moment into entertainment. Humiliation became content. And instead of stopping it, I leaned into it. Because power feels intoxicating when you've never truly had it before. Security escorted Nate out like he was nothing more than an inconvenience. I didn't stop them. I didn't follow him. I turned back to the party. That was the night my marriage officially ended. Or so I thought. The call from the lawyer came the next morning. At first, I ignored it. I was nursing a headache and a vague sense of unease I didn't want to name. The house looked wrecked in daylight. Bottles everywhere. Furniture out of place. Evidence of excess I couldn't undo. When the lawyer insisted I come in and bring my marriage certificate, irritation turned into anxiety. Sitting in his office, listening to him explain my father's will, something cold settled in my chest. The inheritance wasn't unconditional. It never had been. $33 million, the house, the accounts, the assets. All of it depended on one thing. A legitimate child. With my current husband. Within 18 months. I felt physically ill. Nate. The man I had publicly destroyed was suddenly the most important person in my life again. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been terrifying. I left the office in a fog, my mind racing. Money like that doesn't just change lifestyles. It defines futures, erases consequences, buys silence. I couldn't lose it. I wouldn't. So I did the unthinkable. I reached out to Nate. I told myself it was temporary, strategic, necessary. When he agreed to meet me, relief washed over me so intensely I had to pull over on the drive there. I softened my voice, my body language, my words. I spoke about marriage, about mistakes, about second chances. I didn't mention love. He didn't either. But when he didn't reject me outright, hope ignited. Hope is dangerous, because it convinces you that control is still possible. As I left that diner, one truth became painfully clear. If Nate wouldn't come back willingly, I would find another way. After the diner, I didn't feel relief. I felt alert. There is a difference. Relief is soft. It lets you breathe. Alertness sharpens everything. It makes you notice details you used to ignore. Nate hadn't forgiven me. I knew that instinctively. He had listened. He had watched. He had measured every word I said like a man deciding whether something was worth keeping or destroying. But he hadn't said no. And that was enough. Because as long as Nate stayed undecided, the inheritance clock kept ticking. 18 months. That number followed me everywhere. In the shower. In my dreams. In the quiet moments when the house finally emptied and I was left alone with myself. I had thrown him out without thinking. That was my first mistake. My second mistake was believing I still controlled the narrative. Serena was the one who finally said it out loud. "You don't need his love," she said one afternoon, sitting across from me with her legs crossed like she was discussing a business deal. "You need his biology." I stared at her. The words felt obscene, clinical, but also deficient. She continued calmly, as if she were explaining a recipe. How men like Nate could be predictable. How loneliness made people careless. How desperation opened doors morality never could. I didn't interrupt her, because the truth was the idea had already formed in my mind. I just hadn't been brave enough to say it. Once the thought existed, it grew fast. Too fast. I justified it the same way people justify every terrible thing they do, by telling myself it was temporary, necessary, bloodless. Nate wouldn't be hurt. He'd never know. And the child would still be his. That was the lie I told myself when Serena introduced me to Monica. Monica wasn't stupid. That surprised me. She was sharp, quick, observant. The kind of woman who noticed exits and watched hands instead of faces. She was also broke in a very specific way. Debt doesn't just empty bank accounts. It empties principles. We didn't say much to each other. Serena handled the talking. Money exchanged hands quietly. I watched Monica closely, wondering how easy it would be for her to replace me. That fear annoyed me. I pushed it aside. This wasn't about jealousy. It was about survival. The waiting nearly broke me. Every day that Nate didn't call, my imagination filled the silence with disaster. Lawyers. Investigations. Exposés. Then he mentioned the woman at the bar. Casually. Almost offhand. I remember sitting very still when he told me. My body reacting before my mind did. My pulse spiking. My throat tightening. I forced myself to stay calm. Men cheat all the time, I told myself. It doesn't mean anything. What mattered was what came next. He didn't accuse me. He didn't confront me. He didn't pull away. And when Serena later confirmed that Monica had handled everything, my relief felt sinful. Weeks passed. Then the test turned positive. I stared at that tiny pink line longer than I stared at my own reflection that morning. It felt unreal, like the universe had decided to reward me for ruthlessness. I cried, not because I was becoming a mother, but because I was winning. When I called Nate, I carefully controlled my voice. Let it shake just enough to sound emotional. Let joy spill, but not too much. He reacted exactly how I needed him to. Supportive.
calm.
Present. I told myself that meant he was weak. In hindsight, that assumption nearly destroyed me. When he came back into the house, I worked harder than I ever had in my life. I erased evidence. Tyler disappeared completely. His equipment gone. His number deleted. His name unspoken. I redesigned the guest room into a nursery overnight. Soft colors. Neutral tones. A future that looked clean and intentional. I cooked. I smiled. I asked about his day. I became the woman I knew he had married. What I didn't understand then was that this version of me was too polished. Too careful. Guilt always leaves fingerprints. Nate noticed everything. The way I watched his phone. The way I flinched when legal terms came up. The way I spoke about the baby with enthusiasm that didn't quite reach my eyes. Still, he said nothing. Silence, I learned, is the most dangerous weapon of all. The dinner he invited me to unsettled me more than I admitted. The restaurant was intimate. Public enough to discourage scenes. Loud enough to hide words. Calculated. When he told me he knew about Monica, my first instinct wasn't denial. It was assessment. How much does he know? When he told me he wasn't angry, my knees nearly gave out. I mistook strategy for acceptance. That was my third mistake. I filled the silence with explanation, with logic, with confidence. I framed it as cleverness. I framed it as necessity. I framed it as love. And when he praised me for being resourceful, something dangerous happened. I believed him. I believed I had outsmarted my husband. I didn't see that I was feeding him information the way prey feeds a hunter. My mother noticed before I did. She watched Nate the way she watched markets and contracts and men who smiled too easily. "He's waiting," she said one evening. "I don't know for what, but he's waiting." That was when she suggested the postnuptial agreement. I hated the idea, at first. It felt like admitting fear. But fear had already moved into my body like a permanent resident. The agreement was brutal. Protective. Designed to trap him the way we believed he was trying to trap us. When Nate hesitated, my stomach dropped. I knew then that the game wasn't over. That night in bed, when he finally spoke his truth, I felt exposed in a way no amount of money had ever prepared me for.
He saw me.
Not the wife. Not the daughter. Not the heiress. But the manipulator. And when he asked me to choose him without contracts, without leverage, without my mother, I couldn't, because choosing him meant risking everything. And I had never chosen love over power before. Why would I start now? When he walked out, I felt something crack inside me. Not heartbreak. Something colder. The realization that I might finally lose. The next morning, when he agreed to sign, I should have questioned it. I didn't. I wanted the relief too badly. I wanted safety. I wanted control restored. When he asked to hear the full story, I felt proud. Pride is a dangerous emotion. It convinces you that intelligence makes you immune to consequences. As we talked, I felt powerful again. Confident. Untouchable. I thought I was educating him. I was actually condemning myself. I thought victory would feel louder. I thought it would come with relief. Maybe even joy. Some clear sign that the chaos was finally behind me. Instead, it arrived quietly, dressed in false calm. When Nate agreed to sign the agreement, something loosened in my chest. For weeks, my body had been braced for impact, waiting for a blow that never seemed to land. His decision felt like proof that power still belonged to us.
To me.
I convinced myself that patience had broken him, that humiliation had softened him, that he wanted peace more than justice. People like me believe that because we need to. The living room felt different that afternoon. Not warm, not welcoming, just staged. My mother sat upright, composed as always, hands folded neatly in her lap. Serena lounged nearby, casual, smug. Our attorney stood near the window, watching the driveway like he expected trouble even as he claimed everything was under control. Nate stood across from us holding the agreement. He looked calm. That should have terrified me. But I was too busy tasting relief to question it. When he said he wanted to hear the whole story, I felt something close to pride. As if he were finally acknowledging how clever we'd been. how necessary everything had been. I told myself this was closure. I didn't realize it was confession. I spoke slowly at first, choosing my words carefully, shaping the narrative the way I always had. I explained my fear after the will was read. The panic, the pressure, the sense that everything I had been promised was suddenly dangling over a cliff. Then my mother filled in the gaps. She spoke clinically, unemotional, as if describing a business strategy rather than a crime. She explained how Nate's expulsion from a house created urgency, how time constraints forced creativity, how risk had to be managed. Serena added details with a smile. About finding Monica, about vetting her desperation, about arranging logistics and money. I laughed at parts of it. God help me, I laughed. I felt clever again. Powerful. Like someone who had outmaneuvered fate itself. Nate listened without interrupting. He nodded. Occasionally asked for clarification. I mistook that for fascination. When he finally signed the agreement, my mother relaxed visibly. Serena leaned back. I exhaled so deeply my vision blurred. I believed the danger had passed. That belief lasted less than 24 hours. The knock at the door came before sunrise. At first, I thought I was dreaming, a sound bleeding into sleep. But then it came again. Harder, louder, relentless. My heart began racing before my mind could catch up. By the time I reached the hallway, the house was already filled with voices.
Commands.
Heavy footsteps. Federal agents. Their jackets. Their expressions. Their certainty. There was no confusion. No hesitation. No room for negotiation. They moved through my home like it belonged to them. Boxes opened. Papers seized. Phones collected. I stood frozen, my hands instinctively cradling my stomach, watching my mother argue with men who didn't care who she was. Serena cried. I didn't. I couldn't. When they read the charges aloud, the words barely registered at first. Conspiracy.
Fraud.
Theft of genetic material. Wire fraud. Federal violations. Federal. That word changed everything. I looked for Nate. I found him across the street, watching. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just looked finished. In that moment, I understood. The agreement. The questions. The silence. He had never surrendered. He had waited. When they put the cuffs on me, the metal felt cold against my wrists. Heavy. Real. I screamed his name as they led me away. He raised his hand in a small, almost gentle wave. That image still haunts me. Prison strips you faster than poverty ever could. There are no mirrors that matter. No clothes that feel like yours. No privacy to pretend. Time moves strangely inside concrete walls. Days blur. Nights stretch. I replayed everything over and over again. The party. The laughter. The way I told him to leave. The moment I chose power over decency. My trial was efficient. The evidence was overwhelming. Recordings. Transfers. Messages. Timelines. I watched my mother sit stiffly at the defense table, her composure finally cracking as the reality settled in. Serena avoided my eyes. I felt strangely detached as the sentence was read. 15 years. The number echoed in my head without meaning. By the time meaning arrived, it was too late to bargain. Pregnancy in prison is a special kind of isolation.
Everyone sees your body change.
No one celebrates it. I felt the baby move at night when the cell was quiet. A reminder that something innocent was growing inside something irreparably broken. I thought often about Nate then. About what kind of father he would be. About whether he would hate me enough to take my child away. I deserved that fear. When labor began, there was no family. No soft lighting. No joy. Just guards. A doctor. Pain that grounded me in ways nothing else had. When they placed my son in my arms, I expected love to flood me. Instead, I felt grief. Grief for the life I had destroyed before he ever had a chance to know it. They told me his name later. Tyler. I closed my eyes. That final humiliation felt deliberate. I don't know whether Nate chose it or whether the system did. I only know that I cried until my chest hurt. Weeks later, they told me the name had been changed.
James.
After Nate's father. I wasn't asked. I didn't argue. Some decisions no longer belong to me. Prison teaches you patience in brutal ways. I began writing letters to Nate. At first angry ones, then apologetic ones, then honest ones. I told him I was sorry. I told him I understood now. I told him I didn't expect forgiveness. I don't know if he ever read them. I stopped sending them eventually, because some apologies are about easing guilt, not healing wounds. I didn't deserve either. Years will pass before I leave this place. By then, my son will have grown without me, learned to walk, speak, think without my presence shaping him. That is my punishment, not the bars, not the sentence, the absence. Money didn't ruin me. Power didn't corrupt me. They simply removed the illusion that I was better than my choices. I wasn't. I was exactly what my actions proved me to be. And now, all I can do is sit with that truth and hope that the one good thing I ever helped create grows up nothing like me.